Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning for another sutta study this morning with Ayyā Somā. Today we'll be looking at Samyutta Nikaya 46.2, the Kaya Sutta. There's a link in the live chat if you'd like to follow along at suttacentral.net, Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So this morning we welcome Gita, Michael, Jens, Elaine, Edward, Aaron, and Sarah. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us, as well as all the folks just watching but not typing. And if you have any questions at any time, feel free to type them into the live chat, and Ayyā Somā will address them at the end of the talk. All right, I'll pass things over to Ayyā Somā.
All right, thank you, Bhante Sumanon, and good morning, everyone. So we can start by paying homage to Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddham Dhammam Sangham Namasami. All right, so this morning we're going to go through one of my favorite suttas. And it's part of the connected discourses on the Enlightenment factors. So it's already split in sort of two parts. So perhaps we can read the first part and then discuss it step by step. And then read the second part and then go through it step by step. So the sutta goes Atsamaki. Bhikkhus, just as this body sustained by nutriment subsists in dependence on nutriment and does not subsist without nutriment, so too the five hindrances sustained by nutriment subsist in dependence on nutriment and do not subsist without nutriment. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire? There is, bhikkhus, the sign of the beautiful. Frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire. The increase and expansion of arisen ill will. There is, bhikkhus, the sign of the repulsive. Frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen ill will and for the increase and expansion of arisen ill will. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sloth and torpor and for the increase and expansion of arisen sloth and torpor? There are, bhikkhus, discontent, lethargy, lazy stretching, drowsiness after meals, sluggishness of mind. Frequently giving careless attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sloth and torpor and for the increase and expansion of arisen sloth and torpor. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse and for the increase and expansion of arisen restlessness and remorse? There is, bhikkhus, unsettledness of mind. Frequently giving careless attention to it is a nutriment for the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse and for the increase and expansion of arisen restlessness and remorse. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen doubt and for the increase and expansion of arisen doubt? There are, bhikkhus, things that are the basis for doubt. Frequently giving careless attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen doubt and for the increase and expansion of arisen doubt. Just as this body, bhikkhus, sustained by nutriment, subsists in dependence on nutriment and does not subsist without nutriment, so too the five hindrances sustained by nutriment subsist in dependence on nutriment and do not subsist without nutriment. We can spend a few seconds just contemplating these words. So pretty straightforward, isn't it? The Buddha breaks it down so clearly. When I first read this sutta, as often happens, it was sort of intensive therapy session. Kind of going to, a psychotherapist that really knows you well, but that you have just met, and intuitively understands the workings of the mind, and also is aware of what you have been doing with your mind and what has caused for certain mind states to come into being. So the Buddha starts off by talking about nutriment. So we just had breakfast here at the monastery. So it's very relevant. Perhaps you've also just had breakfast, or perhaps you've had lunch or dinner, wherever you are in the world. And we can reflect, how does this body keeps looking like a body, keeps going around, keeps walking, sitting, standing? It's because we feed it. If we stop feeding it, we start losing weight, we start losing energy, we start dying. So in the same way, just as we feed every day our body, we feed our minds. But what are we feeding our minds with? And the Buddha talks about something, goes straight to what is relevant to pretty much every single one of us. So sensual desire. And he makes the distinction between the arising and unarisen sensual desire. So fundamentally, a mind that has no desire whatsoever. What is the trigger that makes sensual desire appear in the first place? And also, when sensual desire is present in the mind, what creates conditions for this sensual desire to increase and expand? Especially in sitting meditation, when we start with the intention or the aspiration to settle the mind and focus the mind on a particular object, whether it's the breath, the hands, the body, the mind itself, whatever it is, then we start seeing, we start experiencing a lot of mental formations that come in. And it kind of seems like it's just doing its own thing, like we have no control of it whatsoever. So at a certain point, ice cream might pop up, or perhaps the beautiful person that we saw the day before might come up in our mind. Or perhaps whatever interest we're in, perhaps we're into furniture, so beautiful furniture pops into the mind. Or beautiful plans pop up into the mind. And then perhaps this thought appears in the mind, but we start fueling it. So the person popping into the mind just pops up, but then we start going, oh, well, I remember the beautiful words they told me. Oh, I remember having this sort of encounter, and oh, perhaps I could go on a walk with them, or perhaps I could get to know them better. Blah, 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 blah. Lots of different stories and ideas. So the increase and expansion of sexual desire appears. So we start delighting in sensual pleasure, and we're actively doing it. And the Buddha says, what are we doing here? How are we fueling all of this? And he says the answer is frequently giving careless attention to the sign of the beautiful. So in other words, obsessing the mind, or focusing the mind with anything that is pretty, anything that is the cause of delight in sensual pleasure in the mind, and not being aware while doing it. And we can see, if we reflect on how we go about our lives, we can see how often we do that. On how much we dwell into longing about the past beautiful experiences that we've had. I've caught myself in the past longing about, the beautiful summers I had in Italy. Oh, so pretty. The beautiful architecture, the beautiful smells, the beautiful food. Now that I don't have them anymore, since I'm in a different continent, sometimes that arises in the mind. And it's up to me in every single moment to decide whether or not to let the sensual thought appear and disappear on its own, or to nourish it. And so if we let it appear and disappear on its own, it stops having momentum, and we can also practice sense restraint. We can also become more and more aware of it and go, actually, don't go there. There is no need to obsess about the beautiful streets and the beautiful architecture in Italy, or the beautiful food, or the beautiful experiences. Realistically, they weren't making me happy for most of my life while I was in Italy. So I doubt that they would make me happy now that they're not available. So we can reflect with that in every single moment, in whatever we are experiencing, whenever lust appears in mind, and whenever we start actively pursuing lust. And if we see that lust is an incredibly present factor in the mind, it's very important to also practice actively to dismantle it. So perhaps veering on the opposite side, creating a little bit of a balance. So if we're obsessing about the beautiful medieval villages in Italy, then we can also remember how dirty perhaps they can be. All the different alleys. Lots of times they smell quite poorly. In the middle of Rome, you'll find all these alleys where the sewage smell is actually quite intense. With the lack of light, actually, in a lot of the medieval buildings, the experience is not really quite as we remember it. And it can be also with relationships, with friends, family, significant others. There's an amusing song in Italy that I used to love a lot, actually, way before I was Buddhist, because it actually nailed my experience whenever I was infatuated with someone. And it goes, you come back into my mind, you come back into my mind, beautiful as you are, come non sei tu, like you are not. And the reason why I loved it was because I was I used to be a Greek type in my 20s. So whenever I was infatuated, I would get infatuated with someone, I would start obsessing about them and creating all these stories in my mind, and trips and things in common that we had, and incredible conversations. And then I would actually see the person, and it was so disappointing because we had nothing in common. We like opposite things. The conversations we had were actually quite dull, and I was like, I like my dream much better. So my aversive side would come up. But I quite like that song because it nailed that. You come back, oh, I'm remembering you, I'm longing you. Oh, how beautiful you are, like you were not. And it's similar actually with Italy, since when I was in Italy, I had like good Italian, a strong distaste for my country. We're the opposite of Americans. We're not really patriotic. We're always like finding the faults of the country. Then after several years of living in a different continent, I was like, oh, and I still do that actually. Oh, Italy is such a great place. Oh, what an incredible lifestyle. The people are so nice and warm-hearted. Oh, all this moral, incredible morality, incredible. Then I go back, I'm like, oh my God, everybody's so immoral and no sense of civility. And I don't like this, and I don't like that. But the reality is that neither of these scenarios is true. It's that whenever we start carelessly paying attention to all these qualities, we're actually building a story in our mind. So whatever comes back in our mind is beautiful as you are, like you are not. And afterwards, the Buddha talks about ill will. And he pretty much highlights how the same sort of pattern of mind is what characterizes ill will, but on the opposite side. So fundamentally, in fact, the example that I was using, that was the cultivation, for example, of aversion of the country where I was born and I was currently living, was creating the conditions, the causes and conditions for ill will to arise in the mind, for aversion to arise in the mind. And the sort of antidote that the Buddha suggests is the same. So paying attention and practicing self-restraint. And the more we start training the mind with practices like loving kindness, for example, we start priming the mind, we start understanding how to balance it out. And instead of constantly going, shifting, veering to one side or the other, veering towards either pure love and infatuation with our experience in everyday life, or towards complete aversion, we start overcoming what is agreeable and disagreeable. And we start getting closer and closer towards unconditional happiness. And we become more and more empowered because we understand the workings of the mind and we're capable of practicing self-restraint. So going about in our day with the right intention of restraining every single of our senses. So the 5 physical senses and the mind sense as well. So restrain the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, when we're eating, the touch, and all the different thoughts that we have. So it's this balance between awareness of what is currently happening and directing our intention towards what is beneficial, what is useful, and restraining ourselves from going in where it's inappropriate. And it's quite beautiful because also the metaphors that the Buddha uses to talk about the first two hindrances are as sensual lust as being the experience of being in debt, and ill will as an illness, which are very powerful metaphors if we reflect on it. Whenever we're experiencing aversion or whenever we're experiencing evil thoughts towards others, focusing on the drawbacks, might taste good at the very beginning, but fundamentally it's a really unpleasant experience. It's no different than a headache, and it can get as bad as a cancer. Extremely painful, so distressful. I remember one retreat, I went to this 2-week retreat, and the first week I had these recurring thoughts of hatred, and I couldn't stop, or so I thought, I couldn't stop obsessing about it. But in reality, I couldn't stop because I was obsessing about it. I was carelessly obsessing about it, which fueled the craving to keep on obsessing about it. And because I wasn't doing anything else but sitting in meditation, I started observing how painful it was physically to dwell in that state, to dwell with those thoughts. It's an illness. And in the same time, conversely, we can see the experience of being in debt. Whenever we're craving things, there's never enough to repay if anyone has student loans. Very unpleasant situation, isn't it? But also, as soon as we pay them off, the sense of tranquility, that unconditional sort of happiness, taste of unconditional happiness that arises, that you're like, I don't have to worry about it anymore. And the third hindrance that the Buddha talks about is sloth and torpor. And he gives some really practical examples on how we dwell, how we create the conditions by dwelling in discontent, lethargy, lazy stretching, drowsiness after meals, sluggishness of mind. It's incredible how all of these are sort of not that harmful, right? They sound a little bit like, what's the big deal? I'm just a little bit sleepy. What's the big deal? I'm just like, I'm laying a little bit like this, and I'm a little sleepy and tired, or stretching. You see Stan the cat, he's the master of sloth and torpor. He's also cute. But it's interesting how the Buddha talks about it as a prison. And a prison can actually be quite comfortable too, if we think about it. But also incredibly uncomfortable. You have no way out. So what I find incredibly skillful of pointing out how we put constant careless attention to all of this is because we see how something so trivial can actually have such dire consequences. And we're not talking about actually sleeping or taking a nap when you really need it, when your body physically needs it, rather indulging in it. I used to be incredibly good at this. especially in the morning, I would put the alarm clock like 2 hours ahead of time and keep snoozing it, snoozing it, snoozing it, snoozing it, snoozing it, snoozing it, snoozing it every 10 minutes. With the result that then I was more tired than had I woken up when the actual alarm clock started. And it generated more and more sloth and torpor. It was interesting. I used to do that in high school, especially, because I was always behind. I hadn't studied well enough for the class. So it's like, I'm gonna wake up 2 hours ahead of time to do that. I'm like, oh yeah, what in 10 minutes? And the result was that I was more and more tired than I was had I woken up at the time it started. And on top of that, I had zero willingness to actually study the lesson. Very bad student. And it's kind of a prison. How do you escape from that? Same exact way then we escape with the other two hindrances, by paying attention and practicing self-restraint, arousing energy. And then we get to our friend doubt. Doubt. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I skipped the restlessness and remorse, which is actually one of the most common things that happens pretty much to anyone who is practicing meditation. So that state of unsettledness of mind, which the Buddha equiparates as being a slave. And when we think about it, whenever we sit in meditation, that's the sort of direct experience that we have on that quality of the mind, where we're like, once again, I'm going to focus on the breath, and then the mind goes everywhere except staying with the breath. So rather than us being able to train the mind seems to be in total control of us, whoever we think we are. So that is the sort of experience of being enslaved with no power over our experience. And a straight sort of direct ways to challenge or overcome this state is, well, definitely when it comes to remorse, the practice of Ayyā, the practice of virtue. It was remarkable how we had once a talk about anxiety a few years ago, and this Sri Lankan monk came, and people were expecting all these sort of kind of psychological sort of steps. Okay, do meditation like this, and then do this and that with your mind, and do this and that. And it was like, you know what, anxiety, what you need to do, practice, be a good person. That's all you have to do. It's like, forget about the meditation. Practice generosity, practice kindness, practice right speech, develop your virtue. And that will create a solid foundation for the mind not to be unsettled, for the mind to be more and more grounded, for the mind to be happy, for the mind to naturally overcome these states of remorse. If you're constantly a good person, for example, if you're constantly a good daughter or son, there's very little to have remorse towards your parents, for example, when they pass away. And at the same time, cultivating peace of mind. So we tend to like a quick fix, but in reality, the restlessness can be only overcome through practice. So constantly training the mind, which is no different than if we want to run the marathon tomorrow. We won't expect to be able to run the marathon straight away. We will go and train, and we will be out of breath, first after 1 second, and after 2 seconds, and after 5 seconds, and after 10 seconds, and then we'll start building up some momentum. And then once again, the last factor of doubt, the last hindrance of doubt. And the Buddha in this sutta just pretty much simply states things that are the basis for doubt, which at first can be a little bit vague, or kind of like, oh, but what am I like paying attention to? But we can see this getting back to Ayyā, so unwise attention. What does that really mean? It means constantly asking ourselves questions that are not really beneficial. So pointing at matters such as, do I exist? Do I not exist? Who was I in the past? Who am I now? Who will I be in the future? Not particularly skillful, not particularly beneficial. So the Buddha instead encourages us, instead of fueling our sense of self-identity, to actually let it all go and to focus on what is important, which is the Four Noble Truths. So this is suffering, this is the cause of suffering, this is the end of suffering, and this is the way out of suffering. And when we start contemplating the Four Noble Truths, automatically doubt disappears. The experience of suffering is pretty clear. Nobody needs to teach us how to suffer. Or, say too much about it. We can actually just look at our experience and understand it and see it as it is. And similar with everything that is taught by the Buddha in terms of the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the way out of suffering. Very experiential, very simple, practical, which creates, conversely, the conditions for faith to arise, for energy to arise, for determination to arise. And so the Buddha actually, the simile he uses for the hindrance of doubt is to be in a barren desert. So just imagine crossing the Sahara, no oasis on the horizon. It's dreadful, of course. You're like, oh, where am I going? Am I even going to get anywhere? Or am I going to just die? Who am I? Where am I? What will I be in the future? So instead, we want to create our own oasis. And I would include also in doubt, what I've really found helpful in my mind is also really reflecting and contemplating on what is relevant in terms to the suttas or in terms of Dhamma, and putting on the side whatever actually creates doubt. So for example, all those interesting things that people like to talk about, the marks of the Buddha, the marks of a great man. Is it true? Is it not true? Did the Buddha really have a weird cone shape? Did he have a sort of weird how do you say that? Split tongue and all the different characteristics. So we like to spend countless, at least through my experience in Buddhist insights, I've met countless practitioners spending countless hours debating on the marks of a great man, but not really practicing spending that many hours on trying to practice like a great man, which is the Buddha. So at the very beginning, when I was also following that route, I saw a lot of doubt arising in my mind. And I was like, oh, is it really? I don't know if I want to believe in this. This sounds like a little bit fluff. Then if this is fluff, then probably all the rest is fluff too. Why am I wasting all this time? So not particularly useful or beneficial. So put it on the side and focus on, once again, what the Buddha says, the Four Noble Truths. And now we get to the nutriments instead for the enlightenment factors. So right now, what we've gone through is basically how to starve the hindrances. So how to stop feeding what we normally feed. And now we get to the chapter where we want to feed what needs to be fed. So we'll go once again through the part of the sutta, and then we'll talk about it step by step. So the Buddha says, bhikkhus, just as this body sustained by nutriment subsists in dependence of nutriment and does not subsist without nutriment, so too the 7 factors of enlightenment sustained by nutriment subsist in dependence of nutriment and do not subsist without nutriment. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness. There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states. There are bhikkhus wholesome and unwholesome states, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states with their counterparts. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of energy and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of energy. There are bhikkhus the element of arousal, the element of endeavor, the element of exertion. Frequently giving careful attention to them is nutriment. And then what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of rapture and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of rapture. There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of rapture. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of tranquility and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of tranquility. There are bhikkhus tranquility of body, tranquility of mind. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of concentration and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of concentration. There are bhikkhus the sign of serenity and the sign of non-dispersal. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of concentration and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of concentration. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of equanimity and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity. There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of equanimity. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of equanimity and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity. Just as this body, sustained by nutriment, subsists in dependence on nutriment, it does not subsist without nutriment. So too, these 7 factors of enlightenment, sustained by nutriment, subsist in dependence on nutriment and do not subsist without nutriment. Great stuff, isn't it? So we can spend a few seconds just contemplating these words. So here, as we were mentioning, the Buddha talks about, once again, what we need to develop intentionally. And these are the factors, the name says it in itself, the factors of enlightenment. So factors that lead to enlightenment. So that when one develops these factors, this leads to the end of greed, hatred, and delusion. Sounds pretty great, doesn't it? Instead of being a prisoner, a slave, or a person in debt, you're an enlightened being. Give me some of that. Sounds pretty great. And the Buddha says, and I have a little quote here from the previous sutta that I think is very useful and beneficial before actually starting to kind of go through the breakdown of the 7 factors of enlightenment, because the Buddha talks about what they're based upon. And so he says, because based upon the Himalayas, the king of mountains, the Nagas nurture their bodies and acquire strength. When they have nurtured their bodies and acquired strength, they then enter the pools. From the pools, they enter the lakes, then the streams, then the rivers, and finally they enter the ocean. There they achieve greatness and expansiveness of the body. So too, bhikkhus based upon virtue, established upon virtue, the bhikkhu develops and cultivates the 7 factors of enlightenment, and thereby he achieves greatness and expansiveness in wholesome states. So I feel the reason why I wanted to mention this is because a lot of times the basis, the foundations of pretty much Buddhist practice is completely overlooked. And the emphasis is put on especially mindfulness and concentration and tranquility and a lot of different, all the different factors. But hardly ever do we focus on the foundations of the building. And without even having to know construction, we can intuitively understand that if we don't build the foundations of a house, the house will crumble. So very important to keep that in mind. And also very important to reflect also how Buddhism for the past 2,500 years has been taught in Asia, which is by working on the establishment of virtue. And so far, the only enlightened beings that I know of have followed this model. So I think it sounds like a good idea to follow the Buddha's lead on here. The Buddha also mentions in another sutta how when the hindrances, on the other hand, are cultivated, the factors do not rise. So it's very important to, when we go about wanting to nourish the enlightenment factors, we also think about starving out the hindrances. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose, it defeats the point. And there we go to the first enlightenment factor, which is the factor that we all like in culture, which is mindfulness, or at least we like to talk about it. So sati. So very important also to highlight how the Buddha says that each of these enlightenment factors is all based upon seclusion, dispassion, cessation, and maturing in release. So all of this underlies the intention of renunciation. which is tied upon, once again, to the cultivation of virtue. Very important. Seclusion is also another form of renunciation, of letting go. And dispassion naturally arises together with cessation. And in, I'll say it to talk about the factor of, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. I would like to quote the Buddha once again from another sutta. This is how he describes it. It says, dwelling thus withdrawn, one recollects that Dhamma and thinks it over. Whenever bhikkhus, a bhikkhu dwelling thus withdrawn recollects that Dhamma and thinks it over, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused by the bhikkhu. So this is also in the Bhuttanga Samyutta. It's another sutta that comes a little bit later on. And actually, here the Buddha talks about how beneficial it is to have a senior practitioner, senior monastic, someone ahead of you in the path, to encounter them, someone who teaches you the Dhamma. And then this Dhamma becomes the subject of recollection that arouses, pretty much creates a sort of domino effect for all the other enlightenment factors to happen, sort of consequentially. We think that we have to put so much effort, but in reality, actually, it's all at the same time, but also there are certain things that just give it the momentum, the right momentum. Like, you just need to hit a domino. And personally, I have to say that this is, I really love this paragraph because this has been very true to my practice. So Bhante Sudazo is the monk who actually I met and introduced me to the Dhamma in full. And I have to say that at the very beginning, there was intellectual understanding, but then a lot of times when I was meditating, I would recollect the teachings. And a lot of times when I was experiencing difficulties in meditation, I would ask myself, well, what would Bhante Sudazo tell me to do right now? And from there was this idea of like, oh, I should be my own Bhante Sudazo. Channel like Bhante Sudazo within me, which is fundamentally channeling the Dhamma. And in that moment, the mind is mindful. Now the mind is fully there, looking, recollecting the Dhamma. And that creates naturally the conditions for the second factor of mindfulness, a second factor of enlightenment to come into being, which is the factor of discrimination of states. And the Buddha says there are wholesome and unwholesome states, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states with their counterparts. And I will quote once again the Buddha in another sutta. He says, he explains this process really clearly. And he says, bhikkhus, before my enlightenment, I love the suttas where the Buddha says, before my enlightenment, when I was an unenlightened bodhisattva, and you're like, oh, just like me. Oh, so cute. Oh, this is like very relatable. But also there's so much confidence in the capability that this is actually a path that we can follow, we can practice, and we can attain the same results that the Buddha has. So he says, before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva, it occurred to me, suppose that I divide my thoughts in two classes, that I set on one side thoughts of sensual desire, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of cruelty. And I set on the other side thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, and thoughts of non-cruelty. As I abided thus diligent, ardent, and resolute, a thought of sensual desire rose in me. I understood thus. This thought of sensual desire has arisen in me. This leads to my own affliction, to others' affliction, and to the affliction of both. It obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana. So careful attention. When I considered, this leads to my own affliction, it subsided in me. When I considered, this leads to others' affliction, it subsided in me. When I considered, this leads to the affliction of both, it subsided in me. When I considered, this obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana, it subsided in me. Whenever a thought of sensual desire arose in me, I abandoned it, removed it, did away with it. So much Dhammasukha. I love that. Was, of course, another of my favorite suttas. And he does the same process for ill will and cruelty within the suttas. It is such practical, like straight to the point instructions, and extremely beneficial. So a lot of times we think that in meditation, the only thing that we have to do is not think. But actually, that's not necessarily the case. So this is what we see in a direct application, the discrimination of states. So with the presence of mindfulness. So recollecting the teachings and analyzing our experience and really seeing causality. When this arises, this arises. When this comes to be, this comes to be. And of course, as we investigate our experience and we see how the Dhamma is relevant to our experience, energy naturally arises. As Bhante Sudaso and preceptor, and Bhante Pamuto's also preceptor back in the day, Ajahn Pasano apparently used to say, is that you're only bored when you're not mindful. So naturally, it's not that we just go to meditation, we're like, oh, now I'm going to stay here and like meditate, but rather it comes naturally by arousing interest in the meditation object, by being present, by recollecting the Dhamma, by really seeing what is beneficial and what is not beneficial, and then energy automatically arises. And we fuel it through arousal, endeavor, exertion. And then we go automatically into rapture. So obviously by arousing energy, piti arises. We're having a great in meditation. It's incredibly beautiful. And from piti, so with rapture, also tranquility comes. And the Buddha distinguishes it in tranquility of body and tranquility of mind, which creates the conditions for the enlightenment factor of concentration to come into being. As the Buddha always says, a happy mind is easily concentrated. The process then to unify the mind doesn't become of just pure, forceful, oh, focus there, focus there, focus there. But it's actually like a process of relinquishment, a process of letting go. And then from this, equanimity naturally arises. So looking at the mind that is concentrated with equanimity, without wanting, once again, without craving for it to be in a shape or form, so without craving for certain certain elements to stay there, to be fixed, and also without being afraid for it to change, but just being fully present with the experience, fully understanding. And the Buddha says that as we nourish this, then it naturally leads to awakening. It naturally leads to enlightenment. And a lot of times, this can be, sutta can be both extremely encouraging, extremely interesting, and a lot of Dhammasukha arises, but sometimes it can also be like, this path is so difficult, so hard, and you can feel very overwhelmed by the hindrances, and it could seem like we're never going to get there. But in the sutta that I put in beforehand, the Buddha says that there's actually a very simple way to experience the complete absence of the hindrances. It says, when bhikkhus, a noble disciple, listens to the Dhamma with eager ears, attending to it as a matter of vital concern, directing his whole mind to it, on that occasion the 5 hindrances are not present in him. On that occasion, the 7 factors of enlightenment go to fulfillment by development. Like that. So I think that's all that I have to say. Well, I didn't say anything. The Buddha said everything. So that's all for this morning. Actually, did long story long. It's already the end of session. But maybe if there's, we'll see if there's a Zen quick.
Okay, thank you, Ayyā. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So there are a couple questions. I'll do the ones that are on topic first. So welcome to some new friends joining, or at least mentioning that they're here. Jessica, Stacy, Ishan, Bhavani, Mark, and Galaxy. And then, so the first question is, Ishan asks, sometimes after my sitting, I feel really tired and I lie down. It happens once in a while. Is this sloth and torpor coming up and fooling my mind to rest?
Well, since I'm not there with you physically and I'm not there in your mind, the only person who has the answer is yourself. So be really honest with yourself. Really ask yourself, am I actually tired right now? So, for example, if it only happens right after meditation, then clearly it's the hindrance of sloth and torpor. So then the appropriate response would be to exert energy. So go directly in opposition to sort of the natural inclination. But if it's an occasional thing that happens after a meditation, and perhaps you didn't sleep the entire night, then actually you just need to rest. So that you have to see for yourself. But normally the majority of the time, I would say that it is paying careless attention to just sort of sluggishness. Only when we are either physically ill or we haven't slept enough, that's the only times when we actually need more rest than usual.
Okay, thank you. And John asks, how do we enhance tranquility of the body without generating sloth?
Say it again, sorry. What?
How do we enhance tranquility of the body without generating sloth?
Enhance the tranquility of the body, okay. Well, once again, by following the sequence, I would say, of the factors of enlightenment. So that's when it becomes, actually the idea, the fact that it seems blurry in our experience, the fact that we equate tranquility to sloth and torpor is an indication that we're actually not experiencing tranquility and meditation. So tranquility and meditation is actually not just like, oh, I feel like very tranquil and so relaxed. No, it's not that. Tranquility is, for example, when you start with a restless mind in your practice, which can be either like an entire year or a lifetime or however long, or just a period of sitting, just half an hour of meditation. You start with a restless mind and you arouse energy, you discriminate the states, and then pity arises, and the tranquility comes like right sort of in automatic. It's an integral part. You're like, yes, I am seeing clearly. Yes, I am present with my experience. So it's a natural effect. It's not something that we're like, we're not cultivating delusion, which is basically what happens when we're cultivating sloth and torpor. We are cultivating awareness, which then also brings peace and happiness and relaxation, which is not drowsiness. So as our practice keeps going forward, then we will be able to distinguish that, and we'll also be clear with ourselves. This is me trying to block out my experience, hence having this sort of confused state that brings sloth and torpor. Or this is me actually dealing with whatever is present, whether it's happy or unhappy, whether it's traumatizing or not traumatizing, whatever it is, we have a strength of mind that then brings as a natural consequence peace and tranquility.
And then Stacy says, I love beautiful as you are, like you are not. And then a bunch of thank yous. Geeta saying she enjoyed covering this powerful practice. There's a couple questions that aren't on topic. Do we want to just save them for Friday? Or do you want to hear what they are?
Yeah, let's see.
So John says, I hope you're doing well. How was your retreat? Any advice for people who want to do something similar?
Oh, yes, we have lots of different retreats that we did that actually mostly Bhakti Sutta offered during the pandemic. So they're on YouTube, so you can just...
I think he means your silent personal retreat.
What about it? So
how was it?
Oh, that's great.
And any advice for people who want to do something similar?
Just go on retreat.
I tried to do one before, but the person around me couldn't get noble silence because silence is so often used as a weapon. And so, like, how do you prepare people around you to be with silence and the positive?
Well, before living in a monastery, I mean, this is also why actually having good friends, good spiritual friends, is not half of the path, but the entire path. Makes life significantly easier. So my good friends here, good monastic friends here, and lay residents here were kind enough to support my retreat. So I didn't have to worry about that. So I just had sort of the perfect conditions, which are naturally arising in a monastic environment fundamentally. When you don't have that available, as a layperson, honestly, what I did in the past was to find a really cheap place and rent it out and go there. So wouldn't necessarily be where I wanted to be. Yeah, when I went, actually even before I was into Buddhism, because I was a writer, I needed some time to be actually alone, completely alone, and out of reach from people that I knew, to avoid any type of temptation or any type of people, calling you, coming to say hello and like, let's have coffee and let's talk about this and that. So I remember I was in Italy and I went to Sicily. My parents live in Rome, so I was like, I can't afford pretty much anything because I was a writer. So writers are broke all the time by default. It's not exactly the most lucrative business, especially in this century. And so I went to Sicily, which the south of Italy is significantly more affordable. And it was just like a modest studio flat in the middle of nowhere. It was great. I did not know one single person in the town. Nobody knew who I was. And I was there for a month, entirely silent, by myself. Maybe I would speak to the person when I would go into grocery shopping. Like, can I have an apple and 200 grams of flour or whatever, you know? And you need to create the conditions, but optimally, it would be great if you could go to a monastic environment if you have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, just come here. The next question or comment, Bhavani says, who are your teachers? Where were you trained?
Bhante Sudaso and Buddhist Insight.
Perfect.
And
And
Venerable Panyavati, who is my preceptor, who is the co-abbot of Heartwood Refuge in North Carolina. So if you're close to North Carolina, you should definitely check Venerable Panyavati and Venerable Panyalipa and the monastic community there. And also I have had the privilege of running this organization for 5 years, and we've had different monastics come here from all different traditions. So have very good karmic conditions this lifetime.
And then the last question is from Mark, who says, you said the only enlightened beings I know of followed this model. Who are these beings that you know of?
Well, all the beings that are reputed to be enlightened come from one continent. So there are certain self-appointed enlightened beings in, for example, the United States that are John Smith profession arhat. But when you look deeply into their definition of arhat, it's a little bit as if I said, Ayyā, Somā, astronaut. I mean, it's cute. I can define myself as anything. Physicist, doctor. But it would be a little bit dangerous if people came to me and, asked for surgery, for example, since I have no idea. I don't even know where we were talking about the liver the other day, and I was like, where's the liver? Somewhere. Not quite sure. Let me open you up a little bit and sorry, I opened the wrong place. So that's the thing. I would say when you do the research and when you also go and travel, I mean, for 2,500 years, this spiritual practice was originated in Asia and has been practiced in Asia for 2,500 years and has just recently come to the West. So I guess these are the people that I trust that are enlightened. Just so happens that monastics have precepts that they can't. You don't tell, hey, I'm enlightened, everyone. So normally the way that one knows that someone is enlightened is by observing them. Is there any greed, hatred, and illusion present in them? So normally it's other monastics who then start spreading the sort of rumor. They'll go like, I think such and such pretty likely enlightened, and then other monastics go and they're like, yeah, I think you're right. And the other person's like, oh, okay, I think you're right. 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 So that's how the momentum starts happening. But yeah, I would say it's a very big sign of unenlightenment when someone goes, hey everyone, I'm enlightened, but by the way, the definition of enlightenment is actually a different one. It's not the one that the Buddha said. Then you're basically like a doctor, like me. I'm a doctor. I have no idea what anatomy is, but I'm a doctor.
Okay, thank you. And that was the final question. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Tonight at 7:30, there will be a Dhamma talk by Bhante Pamuto. So join us then if you can. And then tomorrow as well as Friday, we'll continue with our regular programs. So thanks again, and hopefully we'll see all of you soon. We can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, thanks for joining in.